Today I'll talk about chapter 3. We're going to look at evolution and biodiversity. So a few things. A lot of people already know what I mean by biodiversity, but one thing I want to emphasize, when you say biodiversity, it's more than just species diversity. So I think you're thinking different types of plants and animals. That's what normally crosses your mind, but it's more than that. You're talking about ecological diversity, functional diversity, genetic diversity. So you're talking about different terrestrial and aquatic areas. And you need these in order to do this chemical recycling we've talked about, this energy flow, etc. And you need a good genetic diversity in order to have all these systems work together. So again, it's more than just different number of species. You need to have like some terrestrial areas like forestation. You need aquatic areas that can perform these types of chemical recycling we talked about, energy flow, carbon recycling, etc. And again, I think we all know this, that biodiversity is important for maintaining life on Earth. Again, let's just kind of talk a little bit about this. Is that, functional diversity, let's look at that. Talk about energy flow, matter recycling. Again, always remember, we always go from high quality matter to low quality, high quality energy to low quality energy, etc. Ecological diversity, this is what I was talking about, the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. And again, we know genetic diversity. If we don't have this genetic diversity, evolution is just not going to happen. So we need these types of genetic diversities in our systems. And then, of course, we are familiar with our species diversity. Few things here. And again, I'm not a biologist. I'm a chemist. And I got confused by these terms too. Is that natural selection, let me kind of put a red there. Evolution and speciation, it's not just one thing. There are three different things. Natural selection is a cause of evolution. This is what causes evolution. Speciation is a result of evolution. Different species result. Natural selection will cause evolution to occur. Speciation is the end product of evolution. A few things is that whenever you hear evolution, sometimes you think that it's these biological changes to make something more adaptive to society, to make plants and animals more adaptive. It's not always the case. Like for instance, that's a good example. Anything that changes is called evolution. Like the number of blue eyes in a population, that's actually decreasing over time. So that's evolution. It's a change in gene pool. So the number of people with blue eyes has been decreasing over time. It's an evolution. We're changing the gene pool, but there's no biological advantage. I mean, blue eyes, green eyes, there's no biological advantage. So people always think that evolution is some type of biological advantage. It's not necessarily the case. Only every once in a while you'll see a biological advantage to evolution. A lot of times it's like, well, maybe people's hair colors will get different, eye colors will be different over generation, etc. So it's just changes in the gene pool. It doesn't have to be a biological advantage. So natural selection is a cause of evolution. That's important. Let's kind of circle that. And I guess kind of look at this definition of natural selection. It's going to lead to adaptive changes. So when I say natural selection, it leads normally to things that have an advantageous characteristics. So natural selection will lead to something that has an advantageous characteristics. And again, this is when I say adaptive, it means it's something that's going to give people, plants, animals, an advantage. To a bacteria, it's going to give things an advantage. So natural selection causes evolution. It's a cause of evolution. Again, it starts with a certain number of gene traits in the species, and some of those are going to predominate over others. That's basically the best way of saying that. This is a very big advantage, antibiotic resistance. And so what's going to happen is we have bacteria. A few bacteria will have resistance to antibiotics, just a few. But then over time, those are the ones who are going to survive more and more often. So these are the ones that are going to survive. So say that maybe 1% are resistant. Well, 99% of it is going to die. And then each and every time now, more and more of these resistant ones are going to survive. And so over time now, you go from 1% to like maybe 100% of those bacteria now are surviving. So is kind of like, it goes from like only 1% survive, and then the ones that 1% are going to survive, and then they're going to increase in amounts. They increase till eventually almost all those bacteria will have that gene that's going to survive. So again, they actually call this an allele. They'll have that gene that survives. So again, at first, maybe only one or two of these bacteria survive, but for each generation, and the way they multiply it, more and more of the bacteria that has that gene that's antibacterial resistant, more and more of that will survive. So you have a higher percentage at the end, so you get almost 100%. And this is where bacteria become antibiotic resistant, resistance to medicines, etc. Again, that's a huge advantage in most cases. In most cases, it's going to be a huge advantage for those bacteria, not to us, right? Because we have to keep making different medicines, but a big advantage to us. And the reason bacteria do that quite often is because bacteria multiply very quickly. I mean, humans, it takes us, maybe thousands of years to develop a gene trait or to evolve to a gene trait that's advantageous. Bacteria, since they multiply like every half hour, they can double their population. You're going to see that evolutionary change at a much faster rate. And again, when I say evolution, you're talking about as a population. And again, you can see that towards the end, almost all the bacteria are resistant to these antibiotics. Couple things. Again, individuals don't evolve, populations evolve. So again, the individuals that have these traits are the ones that are going to survive. And so again, the populations now are going to have these traits passed on to it. One thing to kind of keep in mind is that evolution is not survival of the fittest. Or I say survival of the fittest is not necessarily survival of the strongest. So it's not going to be the strongest characteristics that survive. It's just going to be ones that are more fit for survival. So the ones that are not more fit for survival, those are traits that are going to be passed on through generation. Again, this can take thousands of years in some cases. Again, a lot of times these new traits arise from genetic mutations, and then if these new traits are advantageous, a lot of times these are ones that are going to be passed on. So it becomes more common. So again, you'll have these types of genes in you. Maybe everybody has it, but only a few. And that's why you need genetic diversity, right? Maybe only a few will have these type of genes. And then as it becomes more advantageous, as the population evolves, goes from generation to generation to generation, the people, animals, plants that have this advantageous genes, these are the ones that are most likely to survive. And again, this is why you need genetic variability. If you have a population that doesn't have this biodiversity or this genetic diversity, it's not going to survive. So populations that have a very large genetic diversity, these are ones that are more sustainable. These are ones that are going to be more sustainable. And also, I think we know this, ones that reproduce rapidly and in large numbers are better able to adapt. In fact, nowadays you see it too. Especially you have stuff like the rhinoceros. I think even the pandas. I mean, these things they don't reproduce very rapidly at all. I think it may take like 18 months, and then maybe only one or two offspring from that. Again, these things are probably more endangered. I mean, there is, poaching and stuff like that, but these things just don't reproduce at a very rapid rate. So the faster it reproduces, uh, the larger these numbers are able to adapt. Speciation is a different number of species. This is the development of new species from old. So what happens is, again, this can happen like thousands of years, is that as one or two traits change or become more predominant over time, you can actually go from an old species to a completely new species. Again, these are through mutations. So new traits are produced, but are there to begin with. I think that's the main thing. Again, without biodiversity, we won't have enough genes to choose from. Speciation, this is the result of evolution. So enough changes occur over generations to develop a new species from an old one. So basically, you have enough changes over time, you have a completely new species. Like in this point, it's hard to tell which point you had a changeover. Like in this case right here, this is kind of a good PowerPoint. Like you go from yellow to eventually you go to red. So this is like speciation. You go from an old species to a new one. It's hard to tell where the exact change occurs. It's kind of blurry. It just changes little by little by little until eventually you look over a long period of time, you have a whole new species. So it's not just like overnight. And you don't see it from one generation to the next. It's a gradual change. I think that's the main thing. It's a gradual change when you go from one species to a next. It's an accumulation of many small changes. So you can think of that. So it's an accumulation of many small changes. So let's take a look at some of this other stuff here. Again, maybe you're familiar with some of this. Um, Evolution can occur two ways. It can be non-branching evolution. This is what we normally think of. You go from the older species, and then it just gradually changes over time. So again, some of these traits, these small traits, will accumulate over time to have a modern species. You can also have branching, in which you have ancestral species. It can split up into two. One can form a modern, maybe another one can form a blue butterfly. It can be two different distinct species over time, even though they start off with the same ancestors. And normally this is because they stop mating. Like two groups of butterflies will stop mating. They got separated somehow. In most cases, they get separated by geography. So they'll get like geographically isolated. Maybe the land, maybe they'll be split into different parts. Maybe they used to have a glacier that connected these two lands, and then that glacier melted over time, and so you separate out into different land masses, maybe different areas of the ocean that get separated somehow, and then the ancestral species they'll stop mating with each other, and then you'll get two different species. So these things that used to mate now they're separate, and they'll lead to different separate speciation. Again, in most cases, it's because of geography. But that's what I mean by reproductive isolation. So you have a different geographic isolation. Again, you've seen this even in human populations, not a different species, but different characteristics, like ones that from up north, like in Denmark, Norway, Africa, Asia. So these things may not, humans maybe were mating with each other so much, so you didn't have that much intermingling, and so you have different populations of people. Uh, not a new species, but different populations will have different characteristics associated with it. Again, it's because of this geographic isolation. You see this a lot with the wolf. So you had the early fox population, or the fox population, and then they got separated. Some foxes went to the north, some foxes went to the south, and then maybe they got separated by weather, etc., and they weren't crossing anymore, and so you end up with the Arctic fox and then the gray fox, two different species. Arctic fox had this nice white coat. Gray fox had a gray coat. So again, they just got separated out for various reasons. Probably because of maybe ice ages came and they weren't migrating back and forth like they did. So the southern and northern population separated out and they formed two different species of foxes. One was Arctic in the cold weather, and then the other one was the gray fox. And again, one thing that's important, this is we talk about sustainability. As Earth changes, because Earth has changed over billions of years. The climate has changed, land has changed, oceans has changed. We had the drift of the tectonic plates. They'll all be one landmass. Now it's all separate into 7 continents. And then we have to change. Life has to change. Again, this is why you need this biodiversity in order to survive. You've also had these mass extinction events, in which only then new species will evolve from that. I think we've had like 5 mass extinction events, and I think people are saying we're in the 6th one. I mean, so that's stuff we have to consider. So long-term climate changes, collisions among the Earths, and then new species often arise after these mass extinctions. So let's talk about a few definitions here. Let's look at endemic species. These are only found in one area, and again, one thing that's bad about this is that these things are very prone to extinction. Say that you have a certain fish that only grows in one stream. Well, if that stream dries up, well, then all those fishes are dead. So again, this is where you need this biodiversity. These animals and plants to live in different areas, otherwise they may face extinction. I've kind of mentioned before, there's been like 5 mass extinction events. And again, people are saying that we're currently in a 6th. And they're saying that human activities is what's really contributing to it. And again, you can see it because we're losing a lot of area. So again, there's habitat loss, and then climate change because of pollutants in the atmosphere. Again, it's not only carbon dioxide gas, there's methane gas, carbon particles, etc. Once a mass extinction event occurs, more species diversification follows. So again, like for instance, once all the dinosaurs died, again, people are thinking because of an asteroid, they killed the dinosaurs, the mammals diversified. Before, there was like very limited amount of mammals. But then after this mass extinction event of the dinosaurs, all of a sudden you had this diversification. So almost always after these mass extinction events, species fill the void. I think that's the most important thing. Species fill the void, and you have more diversification of species. Again, after the dinosaurs, you had many different types of mammals. You end up with the elephant, bison, dolphin, brown bear, bat. Before the dinosaurs were extinct, I mean, there's a very limited number of mammals. After a mass extinction event, all of a sudden you get this huge diversification of mammals because species come in to fill the void and adapt to this. They adapt to the new situation that has occurred. Few things. Humans have changed the genetic traits of populations. Let's try to talk about this. Artificial selection. This is breeding, right? You want to breed a certain type of cow that has more milk, maybe a cow that gets fatter quicker, etc. Even for pets, right? You like these purebred pets. So instead of having these, we call them mutts. And actually, mutts are actually much healthier. Purebreds have more problems because we do this kind of an inbreeding with it. So again, and those things are actually a little bit detrimental to these animals. But again, you want livestock, like you want pigs that are bigger and fatter, survive under maybe harsher conditions, You have lambs, goats, so cows, right? Um, Agricultural crops. So we're always doing artificial selection, but this hybridization, crossbreeding. This is before GMOs. We were doing that. We mix. We'll cut maybe the branch of one tree, one apple tree, mix it to a branch of a different apple tree. They'll just kind of tie it on, and all of a sudden you may produce the type of apples that you want. If you look at natural apples, they were small and very bitter, but then humans they did this crossbreeding. Uh, by this, and all of a sudden you get the apples that you want. The only difference between artificial selection and genetic engineering, you always hear when you hear genetic engineering, you always think of GMOs. Is that with GMOs is that you're just really changing one or two genes to get maybe the type of crop or even animal that you want. Um, if you look at some of these right here, biotechnology is basically manipulation of organisms. There's DNA technology, and then there's genetic engineering. So DNA is just really you're studying the methods for doing it. Genetic engineering is direct manipulation. You put in one particular gene in there, and again, it's not only just for foods, but for medicines like medicinal insulin. That they did that by genetic engineering. And also realize it's not so much different than what we've been doing for thousands of years. For thousands of years, we've been modifying foods. Um, Again, we talked about insulin. In this case, insulin right here, that was definitely genetic engineering. We used to get insulin from different types of animals, uh, but we can do it now by bacteria. And so they mix in genetically added bacteria to it to get the human insulin that we want. Um, there's recombinant DNA. And again, these are things that are due by genetic engineering, human growth hormone, blood clotting factors, interferon, cystic fibrosis treatment, anemia treatment. So there's a lot of good stuff that comes from this genetic engineering. Let's take a look at this because now the big thing now is GMOs. And again, when you think of modified organisms, we're always thinking about food. And you'll see a lot of people saying they don't like GMOs, etc. The whole purpose of GMOs is that you want to make certain crops, and again, corn has been genetically modified now for like 40 years or so. Same thing with soybeans. Maybe less susceptible to climate because we're having climate change. They want to genetically engineer maybe certain types of maize, soybeans, rice nowadays to make it now maybe more resistant to drought, maybe more drought resistant, pest resistant. So maybe you can add less pesticides. I mean, that's really the whole point of it. You want things that you add less pesticides. These plants will thrive. If it's drought, these plants will thrive too. I was looking at some area in Ethiopia. They were growing lentils. So lentils is real. It's real popular in India, even in the U.S. and those areas in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is undergoing some type of climate change. It gets kind of dry out there. They actually have kind of a desert out there. And so the traditional lentils wasn't growing. They put in these genetically modified lentils, and these things were thriving in these dry areas. So again, that's really the whole point of it. You want higher yields, maybe add less pesticides. So maybe it could be greener in the long run. You use less sand, etc. So that's really the whole purpose behind it. These GMOs. Uh, a few things, and this is by BT corn, that it was able to grow better and not affected by insects. Right now, we think GMOs are safe. And again, I'm not going to be one of those that's going to tell you eat GMOs, don't eat GMOs. We're just going to go by the science. So far now, GMOs are regarded as safe. In fact, they're generally regarded as safe. That's really the definition in the U.S. So Genetically modified so far, we haven't found a problem with it. Again, it's been tested, FDA approved and things uh, like that. Oh, one thing about it, the one GMO that's been applied to animals has been salmon. So salmon, it's hard to grow fish in farms, at least for salmon. A lot of fish you can grow in farms, so rather than the open ocean or streams. So they've kind of approved a GMO form for salmons, uh, in which they've changed one gene to make it mature faster. Uh, but it's not yet brought to market. So that's the one GMO they've applied to animals has been a salmon. So we'll see if that's going to progress or not. But so far, again, I'm just going to spout the science out. I'm not going to tell you to eat GMOs. I don't care one way or the other. But by the science, so far, GMOs have been regarded as safe. And again, there's various studies. There hasn't been a study that shows that it has been unsafe. Uh, Again, no differences. For most studies, there's no difference to implicate human health, etc. I think one of the biggest concerns they have is that only a very few companies control GMOs, those type of plants that they have. So people are afraid that maybe the whole world's food supply will be controlled by just a few companies, and that's a concern too. Don't ever think that's not a concern. It's always good to ask these questions, by the way. So it's always good to ask. I mean, it's always good to say it proves to me that it's safe. Don't be one of those that thinks, okay, well, scientists say it's safe, that's it. But we need to ask questions. Scientists need to study this, perform tests, hypothesis, etc. And again, it's been part of the food supply for a long time, especially with soybeans and corn. Again, they always like to talk about how we've been modifying foods artificially for thousands of years. This is how the original corn had looked like. But again, we've kind of changed it through artificial selection, breeding different types of corn or to see the type of corns that we like till we end up with one that we want. So again, this is kind of a good indication. This was the original corn. Through this crossbreeding, hybridization, etc., we end up with this type of corn that we see today. So again, that's just really kind of an artificial selection. You see that with corn. Again, this people have been doing this for thousands of years. So farmers have been doing that for thousands of years. And again, same thing with animals, right? You crossbreed the animals that you want to get maybe a better milk producing cow, etc. Again, they talked about this is how the banana looked like with a lot of seeds, and this is now the banana today. So these are some good examples. Watermelon, this is how the watermelon was 1645. Now with all this artificial selection, you have the watermelon that we want today. In fact, nowadays you got watermelons without seeds, right? Another type of artificial selection, not GMOs, not something somebody goes in a lab and modify a gene, but something that they've done naturally and artificially for years. It's crossbreeding, etc. And again, some other examples. You had the wild mustard plant through all this kind of artificial selection. You've ended up with cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, etc. One thing about it, when you saw these changes, like going from this type of banana to that type of banana, you changed a lot of genes. Genetic GMOs are just really changes in a single gene, so it's much less of a change to get the type of crop that you want. I think some people, like I said, why do people oppose GMOs? I think it's a lot of things that, when you're trying something new, people are a bit scared. And there's also a little bit of a distrust with scientists. Sometimes scientists come off as they know all the answers, which they don't, just to be honest. They're supposed to be testing their hypothesis, testing by experiments, etc. But so far right now, there's overwhelming science evidence that GMOs are safe. And then you'll see these advertised non-GMO, You can call that fear-based marketing. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to biomes. So biomes are just large areas of similar climate and biodiversity. Um, like maybe a desert is a biome, rainforest is another biome. This a couple of different extremes. They're different by annual precipitation and the average temperature. Like northern Siberia, it's cold out there. That's a different biome. That has different amount of precipitation, different temperature. So let's take a look at the different type of biomes. I've kind of talked about a few of these. So there's deserts. Basically, water evaporation exceeds precipitation. Grassland, forest, and mountains. And again, mountains, you have a lot of water stored as ice and snow. Forests, trees, grasslands, uh, periods of drought and rain. So you have rainy season, non-rainy season, etc. And again, we talked about different types of biomes, depends on temperature, depends on precipitation. So the tropical rainforests will have a lot. Other rainforests, maybe not quite as much. Grasslands will have, like I said, periods of drought and rain. Tropical deserts, not much rain. So again, this all depends on the amount of water and their temperatures. Again, you see from hot to cold, etc. You can have cold deserts, by the way. You get some of these areas up there in Siberia, even northern Canada. Those are deserts. You don't have any rain, even though it's just frozen for the most part of the year. Again, we've talked about how human degradation has caused problems for these biomes, human activities, and we already know about this. You have cities, destruction of soil, habitat, depletion of groundwater. Same thing for all of these. I'm not going to go through and read them all, but again, a lot of this, again, we already know this from experience. Us building, right? You build cities, all of a sudden you have cement rather than grasslands. You can't absorb water, leads to increased flooding, etc. Climate change, overgrazing by livestock, so maybe not enough land for farming, etc. And so, what are aquatic life zones? So aquatic life zones, we can break those down into saltwater, which is most of it, and then freshwater. You have some in between too. Like I used to live close to New Orleans, towards the Gulf of Mexico. You'll have an area which was a little bit salty, and some freshwater will mix in together. One thing about it is that freshwater is really only about 2.2% of the Earth's surface. So most of it is going to be salt water. So again, the fresh water comes from lakes and streams, etc. A few of these things, again, aquatic life zones depends differences in temperature, how much oxygen is in there. So again, the more oxygen, the more plant life you're going to get, food availability, and then really how light penetrates. So you have different levels. So at the surface of water, a lot of light penetrates. The further down you get, the darker it gets. Less and light is going to penetrate. And so that's going to affect the numbers of plants and organisms that live in there also. Uh, Euphotic, so photic means light, well lit. These things are at the surface of the water. Bathyal, they're located just below the surface in which light doesn't penetrate too much. But organisms in this area, like fish and stuff, can swim up to the euphotic area and come back down. Abyssal is very low level, the lowest level, in which there's no light at all. So again, those type of organisms won't be able to swim up to an area that has light. And again, you'll have different types of biomes in there. And again, usually at the euphotic zone, you have the most light. Bathyal zone, a little bit less. Abysmal zone, you do have some plant life. You have some fish life in there, organisms in there, but much less. Again, you can talk about natural capital. Marine ecosystems, there are a lot of ecological services. They absorb carbon dioxide gas. They help moderate the temperature. This is why they always say bridges ice before regular roads, because on roads you have the land in between that acts as kind of a way to moderate the climate, because it actually that gives off some heat. It's going to keep the roads without ice. This is why bridges ice first. Nutrient recycling, biodiversity. So that's the big advantages of marine ecosystems. Ecosystem, economic services. A lot of it is employment, tourism, right? People like to scuba dive, go in the water, very popular. Harbors, pharmaceuticals. These marine ecosystems, coral reefs, fish and stuff, seaweed can provide pharmaceuticals in there. Energy from waves and tides, a lot of food, minerals, etc. And again, we always talk about this. Human activities are disrupting and degrading marine systems. So again, part of this class is try to figure out ways that they can help, right? Help us from stop disrupting and degrading these marine systems in an economical way. Coastal development, overfishing, runoff, pollution, habitat destruction. Some of these are more difficult than others. We can talk about that in class, like something like maybe coastal development. I mean, people always want to seem to live by the coast nowadays. Is there a way to prevent overdevelopment from those areas? Overfishing, I think we can understand how we can do that easy enough. Maybe fish in different seasons, etc. Runoff from all of these lakes and streams and into the ocean can cause problems. Um, Habitat destruction, etc. Again, I talked about wetlands. So wetlands, a lot of biodiversity, will help prevent flooding and stuff. They absorb a lot of water. You saw this a lot during hurricanes. When hurricanes come in, they say a lot of coastal wetlands that would kind of disperse a hurricane, kind of act as a way to kind of break up a hurricane, are not there anymore and goes directly into these urban areas. And you see a lot of flood and destruction. I used to live in Louisiana, so I had a lot of hurricanes, and they were saying that was a big factor of it, of the reason why you had these surges in water when hurricanes come in. It can cause more problems than it once did because you don't have the wetlands. Uh, Beaches are eroding, but because of these rising developments, and so you have rising sea levels. Because you don't have nothing to absorb this water that you want to have. Ocean warmer because of climate change, algae growth, bleaching. This has a lot to do with the runoff from various chemicals, increase ultraviolet exposure. So you have all these type of problems of this natural capital degradation. Freshwater ecosystems, kind of like the same thing. In this case, there's standing, and then there's flowing. So standing is lentic, flowing is lactic. So flowing are streams and rivers, then lakes, ponds, and some of these inland wetlands. Again, they're more stagnant. Again, you can see it. You can see it in the color. Streams and rivers sometimes have a nice clear color. Lakes and ponds are dark murky color because they're not flowing in there. Things are more stagnant in there. Break it down to freshwater, limnetic, profundo, benthic. Again, benthic is the lowest level of sediment, profundo located in between, and then the top area is where you have the open surface waters where most of the light is going to hit. And again, for the most part, the lymphatic zone is where you have most of these uh, activities. Most of these organisms are going to live there, right? You have the green frog, painted turtle, northern pike, etc. Down in the benthic zone is where maybe you have some bloodworms, a lot of sediment, not as much activity because of the lack of light in there. And again, freshwater, same thing. Natural capital uh, kind of helps with climate moderation, nutrient cycling, waste treatment, flood control. We kind of mentioned those. Economic services provides drinking water. A lot of fresh water can use for drinking water, irrigation, hydroelectricity, recreation, employment, etc. A couple of things. Lakes can go by type of productivity, allotrophic, lowest levels of nutrients and less productivity from it. Atrophotic lakes, high levels of nutrients. And then there's this kind of in between. Hypertrophic lakes, mesotrophic lakes, etc. And again, human activities, dams and canals, uh, flood control, levees and dikes, pollutants, wetlands. Um, and again, I saw a lot of these canals to kind of move the water around. You see this in New Orleans a lot. There's a lot of canals and levees. Otherwise, that city, New Orleans, would flood. So you have to build canals. Um, you kind of break up rivers, uh, disconnect rivers from their floodplains, etc. Drain wetlands. So for your discussions, we'll have this in class on Monday. Pseudoscience, something made to appear it has the authority of science behind it when it actually doesn't. So you can look at advertisements. Look at advertisements and come up with something like that. People are saying that if you take this, you're going to feel better. And just kind of bring up an advertisement or something that you see. Just find an example. I mean, don't use GMOs. We've talked about that. Pseudoscience used in marketing. And again, you can just watch TV, watch these programs that advertise this. If you take this, if you do this, you're going to feel great. And that's really pseudoscience. They don't really have the science to back it up. But just come up with an example, and then we'll talk about that in class. And again, thanks for listening, and stay safe.